All right. Thanks for joining us today. Want me to stand right here? Leave? Yeah? Good? Okay. I'm Jason Ulaszek from UX for Good and also Manifest Digital outside of Chicago. The crew here asked me to talk a little bit about social good today. I'm in particular going to tell a couple stories about UX for Good and some of the work that we've done over the last few years and where we're headed this year as well. I'm a pretty informal kind of guy, so even though there's some slides up here, if you've got some questions or whatever from the audience or as we go along, feel free to raise your hand or shout it out. Happy to dive in. Cool? So thanks. So UX for Good, I think the best way I wanted to kind of talk about a couple of the stories here of what we've done and what this is just to demonstrate from past years' participation. And so first and foremost, I want to take you on a little bit of a journey about a city. A city, a place where music was almost so pervasive that you could call it a natural resource. It's not Austin, it's not Nashville, right? And there's probably a handful of other cities it's also not. But it's an important thing to understand in this challenge because it was so woven into the culture of the society of that community. So much so that there was really little system support for musicians or folks in the music community. Because this extended past just your, a solo artist, a band, somebody running the AV, a label owner, etc., band manager, more than that. And so much so that as we looked at this challenge, it was hard for musicians to really define what success was. There's this middle class in this city of musicians, and they are struggling for ways to be able to further access social services, as well as financially manage their profession. So they're artists. You call them starving artist middle class, if you will, at some point, in their city, where it is extremely pervasive and seen all over the place. And really, what we know about music, and in particular this city, is that curation drives a lot of awareness. That's true with any sort of type of music. Think about your own lives when you share socially, and friends, you play music, you're in a band, whatever it might be, or the places you visit. It's all about when it is such an integral part of society, but yet not truly pronounced, right? It is a thing of curation. And so people who are curating this, like Mark Samuels as an example, who owns a record, Basin Street Records, or a label I should say, is taking part in kind of a curation process. And obviously in the city it's hyper-local, so there's music everywhere. It permeates every street corner, even multiple musicians at times. And as I mentioned, there's a bit of a management problem, right? So when it is so pervasive and also not pronounced in the way that the city supports it, although it acknowledges it and it doesn't necessarily create the right structure to support it, what happens is that management, band managers, like this gentleman, has struggles with the ability to kind of scale. And so it starts to become kind of a business situation for being able to further harness really great potential, music potential, and turn them into the next big thing. Musicians are often reluctant to ask for help. It's also a very big proponent in this city. There's a sense of pride. There's also a sense of not totally understanding what I need to know to be able to financially manage my profession as a business and treat it that way. And so it becomes kind of a challenge for folks. And so Doreen Kitchens, who's the artist on the right, has played for 2 presidents, has traveled around the world, yet still plays on the street corner for tips. And in fact, in this city that has 8.8 million tourists, they essentially support 4,500 musicians. And the average annual income is $27,000. So if you think about this middle class and you think about the situation of trying to make it as an artisan, your craft, it's really challenging. Think about trying to live, married, 1 kid, $27,000 a year. That is not a lot of money to be able to support your family and to be able to look long term and putting kids to school, et cetera, et cetera. And this city is New Orleans. Who's visited New Orleans here? Yeah? Pretty pervasive music, right? Well, one thing that you notice about New Orleans is that they, unlike a Nashville, unlike in Austin at times, they don't necessarily focus solely on promoting coming to the city for music. It's part of it, but it's not a leading or driving factor. And so that is kind of a missed opportunity for them. It's also a missed opportunity for the artists that are part of that music community. And so in 2012, we took on a project that examined many of these types of challenges and insights. And we worked with the Grammy Foundation, their nonprofit foundation, Music Cares, and then the Jazz and Heritage Foundation. And we took 12 designers from around the country to New Orleans for 4 days. And our challenge was really about designing new ways to provide funding resources for artists in need, so these musicians, these folks in the music community. It was also one of building a model for them to become more financially viable and stable. And so those were the 2 challenges we worked with Music Cares on. And let's talk a little bit about what that looked like. Over 4 days, we completely immersed ourselves in that music community. We went out, and this is a shot of starting out the first day, sitting at the Jazz and Heritage Foundation during Jazz Fest, and talking with those folks that are playing the role of curator in that community. Speaking with Scott Goldman from the Grammys Music Cares. He's the president of Music Cares. And then, obviously, one of the most important things as a designer is to get out there and immerse yourself in that culture, in that community, and understand what's going on so we can better design from a point of reference or a point of empathy. And so we did that. I mentioned Doreen. And we started to move our way through the city. Spending times in clubs, spending times on street corners, talking with musicians, talking with folks that are highly influential that travel around the world to make their living outside of New Orleans. And outside of New Orleans is a big important mention here, because somebody like Evan Christopher, who is an extremely talented clarinetist, makes more money leaving the city than he does actually playing in his hometown. It's kind of sad. It's kind of like a natural resource that gets exported at a skyrocketed rate, right? Pretty sad. We spent time talking with folks that were self-taught, like Nesby Phipps, who's a up-and-coming rapper, trying to make it in New Orleans and trying to advance his career. Spending time where they're at in the community. Going to clubs, as I mentioned, and then spending time on street corners, talking to the musicians that were busting their butts for tips. And so this is one of the bands that we talked to. And as any good design team might, we take that information back and we start to think through that. What are some of the insights? We start to synthesize that information. And that's really critical because a lot of strategies come out, some that are helping to validate some really hypotheses that the organizations collectively had, and some that were new, were pushing new ideas and new thoughts. And like any good designer does, we start to take on that synthesis with about 1 million post-its, some sketches, some ideas, continue to validate and bring these stakeholders into the room to understand if we're going in the right direction. And mind you, this is only 4 days. So this is like a massive SWAT team coming in and getting to work. And what we found in some of these solutions is that, obviously, as I stood up here and talked about funding and economic resources, that was a critical piece. Acknowledging that and really pronouncing that as part of a marketing campaign for the city, both inside the city and outside the city at large, is really important. And so how could we start to examine introducing new points of revenue or financial support for musicians to further stabilize them, as well as what are some of those marketing campaigns that could help to drive the message. And that's where we started to come up with this idea called Tip the Band. And so Tip the Band for us, in that exercise, started to become a really kind of compelling notion of like, hey, these people are here providing a service, it's really great music, you're having a great time, and as a tourist, right, as one of the 8.8 million tourists that comes to the city, you should recognize that. Don't take that for granted. And that was kind of what the genesis of the campaign was for. And so we even took it to the next step where it was, how could we partner with venues to take advantage of existing behaviors that were already naturally occurring if you play on tourists, if you play on them going to clubs and restaurants and venues for entertainment, and much like you tip your waiter or bar staff, right? Same kind of concept. What if you put an additional line item on the tab, allowing you to make it easy and capture off an existing behavior? So that was one of the ideas. Well, what if we actually designed a piece of technology called Tip to Band and made it so easily to share, to help curate, to help explore the city as a tourist, and the music offerings that it has, and where you're at, proximity, everybody's carrying a smartphone, and allow them to tip the band right there. I love the band, it's awesome, I love the music, oh, I was having a great time, you're in the movement, excuse me, you're in the moment, right? And so how do you play on some of that emotion, right, to capture on a behavior, right? That's how we design. We design by understanding motivating factors, right, to drive influence. And so we started to sketch out those ideas and present that back to music fairs, the Grammys and the Jazz and Heritage Foundation. And it was a really kind of inspiring moment for them to think about how to use technology differently than they had previously. And so they had previously tried to really push this message through much of the bureaucracy of politics and wind up on, how do we change tax incentives and all sorts of really fun, fancy, complex things into a notion of using digital to capture off on what's happening from a behavior standpoint already with tourists. And so that's where Tip the Band started. We also focused, as I mentioned, this middle class set of musicians lacked many of the business skills to be able to really truly take advantage of their craft and financially support themselves. And so one of the challenges around band management is that these band managers who are out there in the city would generally not talk to a band unless they're making $500,000 or more. That's a problem when you have a growing middle class of musicians who don't actually gross that. And so what winds up happening in this situation is you lack business skills, you lack understanding of how to financially manage yourself, and no one's going to talk to you. There is a lack of, in New Orleans, really a marketing arm and a business arm like there is in Nashville and LA and many other cities that have a very grounded music and arts focused as a business. And so we came up with ideas about band management and training. Think about it as the Fitbit for your band, if you will, analogy, right? And so we thought about ways that you could arm bands, right, and becoming kind of their own collaborative band manager and practicing skills and enabling behaviors that many of these successful band managers and record or label owners, excuse me, do today. How do you put that in the hands of them? So then we came up with some band management tools. And one of the most important things that we discussed and thought about is how do you pull some of the importance about understanding what's happening already with this 8.8 million tourists that come to the city, what the average annual income is for this middle-class musician. And if you were able to actually take advantage of some of these digital tools or ideas and move the needle by $5 for each tourist, you could, in essence, create an additional $10,000 a year for that middle-class musician, moving them from $27,000 a year to $37,000 a year. That's a big difference if you're trying to provide for your family, your kids, get them educated, etc., right? And then as that progressed and everybody got excited about the ideas, we presented those ideas to the Interaction Design Awards. And we wound up winning People's Choice, which was an exciting thing for us because this was the second time. Audience participation. And so there was the second year we ever did UX for Good. So that was, to me, a really important point, a turning point where we were starting to get some level of validation of this idea and this thought of getting out there is recognized. I'm not saying we've solved everything in the music community in New Orleans by any means at all, but I look at it as a catalyst, as validation that this type of work that we're doing can serve as a catalyst for inspiring and breaking open new boundaries. The other thing that wound up happening is the Tip the Band idea actually was picked up by somebody that had participated in UX for Good into a Super Bowl hackathon that they had in New Orleans. And they took that idea, and two developers in a matter of 48 hours actually built the thing. So it's out there today, thedigitaltipjar.com. It was at the same point in time where I had 20 HCI grad students participating, extending some of these ideas. So the beginning part of 2013 for us as an organization was really important because there was a lot of really great momentum happening. And so that was also where the Interaction Design Awards started to play out too. And so as this digitaltipjar.com got out there, in the matter of literally a few days, bands were signing up a free profile, getting a free profile, a free QR code. Yes, I know QR codes are on the way out. We understand that now. But at the time, they were still there. Printing them out, and tourists could actually go up to the street corner where they've posted their QR code, their smartphone, pull up the band's profile page, and then donate immediately via PayPal. We were seeing tips of $400 by people literally in the first couple of days. And that's because we've made it so easy. And so now that app continues on. There's also another company that we're working with to build out an experience in association with it as well too. And that's kind of the first story of UX for Good. The second story picks up where the first one left off. That is to say that when we were presenting the ideas from our first event in New Orleans to the Clinton Global Initiative, the Dalai Lama Center came to us and said, hey, we really think you're onto something. We would like to talk to you about coming to Vancouver. And so in 2013, we trekked out to Vancouver and started looking at how do we pull in designers from around the globe and tackle a new challenge, which was, for them, the Dalai Lama had posed challenges in 2009 about developing tools to teach social and emotional learning in public schools. And that was a really important aspect for the Dalai Lama Center because sometimes they're misconstrued as only being kind of this a religious organization. But what they're doing is they're talking about mindfulness, which is not really religious based. It is about empathy, about social responsibility, about altruism, these really wonderful qualities. And they were having a hard time being able to advance that groundswell within Vancouver and also beyond. And so when His Holiness asks you to get involved, or his organization asks you to get involved, you do it, right? Victor Chian is the founder of the Dalai Lama Center. And so we worked with him and his organization in Vancouver to set out, much akin to what we did in New Orleans, around 4 days, 2 days being research and immersion, and the next 2 days being really all about driving through synthesis of what we've learned, and then coming up with ideas. And this was a year that, for us, was really important to continue to evolve what we were doing, the event experience, because we want to continue to examine and explore ways of bringing these ideas to life. So you'll see some of that in this story. And so what did we do? We went out to schools, hung out with kids and parents and teachers, really tried to learn what was going on from a successful program in the curriculum and how they were teaching social and emotional learning. And we watched all these different programs, like the Roots of Empathy, where they bring babies into the classroom, and the classrooms adopt young babies and watch them develop, through to watching kids play at recess, and all the dynamics that occur in that setting. And again, the teachers instructing these kids, right? What was going on that was working, as well as what was going on that was still a challenge in classrooms that hadn't adopted it. Most definitely visiting with people that were outside of your traditional curriculum setting, so programs and services inside the education space, talking with administrative officials, interviewing them, and really getting down to the core of like what's happening here and what are some of the challenges. And so we took all that back, and what did that look like? It was 30 plus interviews with Dalai Lama Center members, administrators, conference attendees, teachers and students, more than 200 hours of primary and secondary research, which is a lot if you consider that in 2 days, or it's really a 2-day time frame of amassing that amount of insight. Thousands of post-its and sketches and visioning docs, and that's more about the synthesis part of this. And then 4 kindergarten sing-alongs. That's important to experience, just for the sake of experiencing it itself, but just for being in that moment and watching the dynamics of how that curriculum has had a positive impact on those children. And so what does that look like when that happens, when you get designers together after a few days of research and they start to get at synthesizing that? And it looks a little like this. And so after that synthesis, we started to kind of solution, right? How do we drive at some of these kind of underpinnings of what was happening within this challenge? And so this is about, I think maybe about 3 o'clock in the morning or something like that. The night before, we're presenting out to the Dalai Lama Center folks. And one of the big ideas that we had was this notion of something called the heart-shaped toolbox. The heart-shaped toolbox is a resource, a digital resource for teachers and for parents to be able to get access to curriculum that was previously locked up or collecting dust on shelves or too expensive to be able to access at $1,500 plus a pop. That is not something that is easily accessible for teachers, even looking to try to experiment in their classroom. And that was a really big idea that came out of this work that we did. And it looked a little bit like this. As I mentioned, access to the amount of time that you have to explore and experiment with this curriculum, and then what you're trying to do.